Evening. I just want to share this opening initial for you. Okay, so tonight I'm going to be reading a section of the Red Book called The Divine Folly, and this is the initial that begins that section. But before I even discuss that, I want to mention to all of my subscribers that there is a very significant conference going on in Switzerland in April. And you may want to attend this. I'm giving you the brochure, rather the poster for the event. Which is in Ascona, Switzerland. This is a version of the Ascona or the Aranos conference, and there is still space available open to the public. So if you'd like to attend this conference, it's not that expensive. I think I paid about $800 for the conference itself, but you'd have to get yourself there and cover hotel. So my estimate for an American would be about $2,500 to attend, counting airfare if you buy your ticket soon, and also if you get your hotel reservation soon. So I urge you to consider that. I'm also going to show you the conference brochure, or I'm sorry, the program. I'm going to page through it here very briefly, just so you can see that. And so if you're interested in this, you will be able to take it a little bit at a time on this video and see the full details. So it's quite a conference. Let's see. Did I get it? I guess I did. It's this one. Okay. All right. So this is the conference brochure, and I'm going to scale, scroll through it page by page. And again, that's the cover poster, and then here's the basic information. If you're watching this video afterward, you'll be able to stop the video and read it. And so here's the next page. Gives you the costs of the registration. Even for the most expensive reservation, it's 550 Swiss francs. So it's not terribly expensive. And so this is the program. And so if you're very interested in Jungian psychology, this is going to be an amazing conference to be a part of, because all of the leading, or not all, but many of the leading Jungian analysts of the world will be participating, including Stephen Eisenstadt, who was a founder of the Pacifica Graduate Institute, and Thomas Arst, who's one of the leading editors of Jung's Red Book for our time. A few others. Joseph Cambray, who's the current president and provost of Pacifica Graduate Institute right now, and Linda Carter, who works there and who has written some very important Jungian essays. And here's another group. Christine Maillard has a wonderful article about religion in volume 4 of Jung's Red Book for our time. And Lance Owens, who's famous for his work on Gnosticism, and then, of course, Mary Stein, who is the author of Jung's Map of the Soul, an introduction, which is the basis for the famous BTS K-pop group. It has now created 2 albums based on Murray's book, and they have 80 million followers, more than. And so hopefully Dr. Jung's information will get out there better, thanks to BTS. And so I hope you can join us. I will be there. I will be attending. Why do I have that shadow in my... Okay, let's see what happens if I change that. That's not going to be good. Sorry. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to do this reading, and welcome to those of you who are watching. I guess that's because of the brightness of my wife's lamp there somehow, which hasn't been a problem in the past, I didn't think, but anyway. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead with it. All right, so I'm going to read this section called The Divine Folly. It's only 5 pages long, but in order to understand this section, I'm going to read one of the key footnotes, because in this act of imagination that Dr. Jung is conducting, he encounters a librarian, and he's speaking to the librarian about a book by Thomas à Kempis, and so called The Imitation of Christ. So I want to read the footnote about it so that when we come to that part of the passage, you'll know what we're talking about. So here's the footnote about The Imitation of Christ. The Imitation of Christ is a work of devotional instruction that appeared at the beginning of the 15th century and became extremely popular. Its authorship is still in dispute, though it is generally attributed to Thomas à Kempis, born 1380, died 1471, who was a member of the Brethren of the Common Life, a religious community in the Netherlands that was a prime representative of the Devotio Moderna, a movement stressing mediation and the inner life. In clear and simple language, The Imitation of Christ exhorts people to be concerned with the inner spiritual life as opposed to outer things, gives advice as to how this is to be lived, and shows the comfort and ultimate rewards of a life lived in Christ. The title derives from the first line of the first chapter, where it is also stated that, quote, anyone who wishes to understand and to savor the words of Christ to the full must try to make his whole life conform to the pattern of Christ's life, unquote. The theme of The Imitation of Christ dates back much earlier. There was much discussion in the Middle Ages concerning how this was to be understood. On the history of this notion, see Giles Constable, The Ideal of the Imitation of Christ, in 3 Studies in Medieval Religions, Societal and Social Thought, Cambridge University Press, 1995. As Constable shows, 2 broad approaches may be distinguished depending upon how imitation was understood. The first, the imitation of the divinity of Christ, stressed the doctrine of deification, by which Christ showed the way to become God through him. The second, the imitation of the humanity and body of Christ, stressed the imitation of his life on earth. The most extreme form of this was in the tradition of stigmatics, individuals who bore the wounds of Christ on their body. And of course, we've had the example of this in the Philippines, where people still have themselves nailed to a cross at Easter time. Okay, so now I'm going to read the Divine Folly. I'm reading from the Red Book by C.G. Jung. This is the Reader's Edition. I'm on page 328 of the Reader's Edition, and it goes through to 332. Before I begin, Robert asked, what is BTS K-pop group? Robert, just put BTS into any search engine, BTS K-pop group, and you'll get a zillion hits from that. So that I'm not going to answer it here. And you will see they're currently about the most popular, I guess, rock group in the world. All right, so this is part 33, the Divine Folly. I am standing in a high hall. Before me, I see a green curtain between two columns. The curtain parts easily. I see into a small, deep room with bare walls. There is a small window with bluish glass above. I set foot on the stair leading up to this room between the pillars and enter. In the rear wall, I see a door right and left. It's as if I must choose between right and left. I choose the right. The door is open. I enter. I'm in the reading room of a large library. In the background sits a small, thin man of pale complexion, apparently the librarian. The atmosphere is troubling. Scholarly ambitions, scholarly conceit, wounded scholarly vanity. Apart from the librarian, I see no one. I step toward him. He looks up from his book and says, "What do you want?" I'm somewhat embarrassed since I don't know what I really want. Thomas à Kempis crosses my mind. I'd like to have Thomas à Kempis's The Imitation of Christ. He looks at me somewhat astonished, as if he didn't credit me with such an interest. He gives me an order form to fill out. I too think that it's astonishing to ask for Thomas à Kempis. Are you surprised that I'm requesting Thomas's work? Librarian. Well, yes, the book is seldom asked for, and I wouldn't have expected this interest from you. Jung. I must confess that I'm also somewhat surprised by this inspiration, but recently I came across a passage from Thomas that made a particular impression on me. Why? I can't really say. If I remember correctly, it dealt with the problem of the imitation of Christ. Librarian, do you have particular theological or philosophical interests? Or do you mean whether I want to read it for the purpose of prayer? Librarian, well, hardly. If I read Thomas à Kempis, I do so for the sake of prayer or something similar, rather than out of scholarly interest. Librarian, are you that religious? I had no idea. Jung, you know that I value science extraordinarily highly, but there are actually moments in life where science also leaves us empty and sick. In such moments, a book like Thomas's means very much to me, since it is written from the soul. Librarian, but somewhat old-fashioned. We can no longer get involved in Christian dogmatics these days, surely. Jung. We haven't come to an end with Christianity by simply putting it aside. It seems to me that there's more to it than we see. The librarian. What is there about it? It's just a religion. I. For what reasons, and moreover, at what age do men set it aside? Presumably, most do so during their student days, or perhaps even earlier. Would you call that a particularly discriminating age? And have you ever examined more closely the grounds on which people put aside the positive religion? The grounds are mostly dubious, such as that the contents of belief clash with natural science or philosophy. Librarian. In my view, such an objection should not necessarily be rejected out of hand, despite the fact that there are better reasons. For example, I consider the lack of a true and proper sense of actuality in religion a disadvantage. Incidentally, a host of substitutes now exist for the loss of opportunity for prayer caused by the collapse of religion. Nietzsche, for example, has written a more than veritable book of prayer, not to mention Faust. Jung. I suppose that's correct in a certain sense, but especially Nietzsche's truth strikes me as too agitated and provocative. It's good for those who are yet to be set free. For that reason, his truth is good only for them. I believe that I've recently discovered that we also need a truth for those who are forced into a corner. It's possible that instead they need a depressive truth, which makes man smaller and more inward. Librarian. Forgive me, but Nietzsche interiorizes man exceptionally well. Jung. Perhaps from your standpoint, you're right, but I can't help feeling that Nietzsche speaks to those who need more freedom, not to those who clash strongly with life, who bleed from wounds and who hold fast to actualities. Librarian. But Nietzsche confers a precious feeling of superiority upon such people. Jung. I can't dispute that, but I know men who need inferiority, not superiority. Librarian. You express yourself very paradoxically. I don't understand you. Inferiority can hardly be a desideratum. Jung. Perhaps you'll understand me better, for instead of inferiority, I say resignation, a word that one used to hear a lot, but seldom anymore. Librarian. It also sounds very Christian. Jung. As I said, there seem to be all sorts of things in Christianity that maybe one would do well to keep. Nietzsche is too oppositional. Like everything healthy and long-lasting, truth unfortunately adheres more to the middle way, which we unjustly abhor. I'll read that sentence again. Like everything healthy and long-lasting, truth unfortunately adheres more to the middle way, which we unjustly abhor. Librarian. I really had no idea that you take such a mediating position. Jung. Neither did I. My position is not entirely clear to me. If I mediate, I certainly mediate in a very peculiar manner. At this moment, the servant brought the book, and I took my leave from the librarian. The divine wants to live with me. My resistance is in vain. I asked my thinking, and it said, take as your model one that shows you how to live the divine. Our natural model is Christ. We have stood under his law since antiquity, first outwardly and then inwardly. At first we knew this, and then knew it no longer. We fought against Christ. We deposed him, and we seemed to be conquerors. But he remained in us and mastered us. It is better to be thrown into visible chains than into invisible ones. You can certainly leave Christianity, but it does not leave you. Your liberation from it is delusion. Christ is the way. You can certainly run away, but then you are no longer on the way. The way of Christ ends on the cross. Hence, we are crucified with him in ourselves. With him, we wait until we die for our resurrection. With Christ, the living experience no resurrection unless it occurs after death. If I imitate Christ, he is always ahead of me, and I can never reach the goal unless I reach it in him. But thus I move beyond myself and beyond time, in and through which I am and as I am. I thus blunder into Christ and his time, which created him thus and not otherwise. And so I am outside my time, despite the fact that my life is in this time. And I am split between the life of Christ and my life that still belongs to this present time. But if I am truly to understand Christ, I must realize how Christ actually lived only his own life and imitated no one. He did not emulate any model. If I thus truly imitate Christ, I do not imitate anyone. I emulate no one, but go my own way, and I will also no longer call myself a Christian. Initially, I wanted to emulate and imitate Christ by living my life while observing his precepts. A voice in me protested against this and wanted to remind me that my time also had its prophets who struggle against the yoke with which the past burdens us. I did not succeed in uniting Christ with the prophets of this time. The one demands bearing, the other discarding. The one commands submission, the other the will. How should I think of this contradiction without doing injustice to either? What I could not conjoin in my mind probably lends itself to living one after the other. And so I decided to cross over into lower and everyday life, my life, and to begin down there where I stood. When thinking leads to the unthinkable, it is time to return to the simple life. What thinking cannot solve, life solves. And what action never decides is reserved for thinking. If I descend to the highest and most difficult on the one hand and seek to eke out redemption that reaches even higher, then the true way does not lead upward, but toward the depths, since only my other leads beyond myself. But acceptance of the other means a descent into the opposite, from seriousness into the laughable, from suffering into the cheerful, from beautiful into the ugly, from the pure into the impure. Okay, so that's it. I will look at your chats in just a moment. I just want to read the other footnotes at the beginning of this reading, which begins on page 328 of the Reader's Edition of the Red Book by C.G. Jung. I read the explanation about Thomas Kempis and his book, The Imitation of Christ, from the 16th century or the 15th century. But now I want to read the other footnotes. So this act of imagination was the ninth adventure, the first night of the ninth adventure in Dr. Jung's active imagination, and it was conducted on January 14, 1914. Now, keeping in mind that everything that we've read in this book up till now, which is half of it, all came since December 12th, 1913. Okay, so there's a few more footnotes here. Let's see, where's this one? Okay, so so Dr. Jung in the text says, Nietzsche, for example, has written a more veritable book of prayer, not to mention Faust. And the footnote says, thus spoke Zarathustra. So that's the Nietzsche book that Dr. Jung was referring to. On page 331, hence we are crucified with him in ourselves. With him we wait until we die for our resurrection. And the footnote reads, in the Imitation of Christ, Thomas à Kempis wrote, there is no salvation for the soul, nor hope for eternal life, except in the cross. Take up your cross then and follow Jesus, and you will enter into eternal life. He went before you carrying his cross, and on the cross he died for you, so that you too should carry your cross and long for a death on the cross. For if you share his death, you will also share his life. And then there's another footnote. With Christ, the living experience no resurrection unless it occurs after death. And the footnote reads, the draft continues, but we know that the ancients spoke to us in images. Hence, my thinking advised me to emulate Christ, not to imitate him, but because he is the way. If I follow a way, I do not imitate him. But if I imitate Christ, he is my goal and not my way. But if he is my way, I thus go toward his goal, as the mysteries had shown me previously. Thus my thinking spoke to me in a confused and ambiguous manner, but it advised me to imitate Christ. And in Dr. Jung's extensive works, and especially in Ion chapter 5, he explains that by imitation of Christ, he means that we must all search for ourself, which is our deep unconscious, and learn what we, each one of us, is intended to be. That's the individuation process. Now I'll quickly look at your comments here. Montana says a reading of Jung's seminar on Zarathustra would be cool. Well, Montana, I would love to do that, but he gave 89 seminars on Thus Spake Zarathustra over a 5-year period, and the book that contains them is 1,600 pages long. So I acknowledge that I might do it if I live long enough. I hope so. But I appreciate the idea. You're right. But anyway, in the Dropbox, if you are a member of our Dropbox, you can find the electronic version of Dr. Jung's lectures on Thus Spake Zarathustra. You might find them interesting. I certainly did. Sean says, Robert, I would say they're prophesying the unconscious through their music. They are a worldwide renowned music group. Oh, referring to BTS. It would be funny to see what Jung would say if he could witness BTS today. That would be hilarious. I'm sure he would have his eyes wide open. That's for sure. Montana says, I need to give those guys a listen. I've just always had a distaste for most pop music. I'll give them a try after the reading. Montana, I suggest you find them on YouTube. and give them a watch as well as a listen, because one of the phenomenal things about BTS is the imagery that goes with their music. And you're not going to appreciate it without seeing that imagery. They do sing in Korean, so unless you find one of the videos that has English subtitles, you definitely want to find the video version, not just the music itself. And Nicholas says, Montana, gotta love those wings. Yes. Okay. Montana says, I love hot wings too. Okay. Well, there are a lot of wings going around in BTS these days because they have a new song called The Black Swan, and the performance of it is quite impressive. Montana says, Nicholas, what do you mean? Oh, Wings is an album by BTS. Gotcha. Okay. Nicholas says, Sean, if Jung had a distaste for Jungians, I don't think it'd be that positive reaction he'd have. Still, it's better to have BTS with Jungian imagery than the usual senseless pop, I feel. I agree with that. I saw a photo of BTS yesterday. They had wings and stuff. Yes, they do, because their song is called Black Swan. And they also did an album called The Wings Album, so, which was based on Hermann Hesse's book Damien. And so Sean says, what's interesting is I was just playing a Bach chorale prelude, Jesus Christus Unser Heiland, which translates to Jesus Christ our Savior. Nicholas, that's wonderful. Jesus saves. And Sean says, I'm not that much of a fundamentalist, and speaking of ways, I go my own way. That's well for all of us. That's good advice for all of us. Dr. Jung, by the way, he wrote about religion and spoke about religion all of his life. And a lot of the Red Book is about religion. But he did not go to church at all after his wedding until his funeral. And this is a man who was brought up in the church because his father was a Swiss Reformed pastor. Montana says, oh God, haha, I didn't realize the seminar that had that much content. And the Fire says, I want to check it out. Nice to see you. So joyful. What's BTS? Well, BTS is a Korean pop group, which some years ago now took up the work of Dr. C.G. Jung, and mainly because they decided to focus on mental health. And it's been a godsend to young people all around the world. And to me too, for that matter, and to Murray Stein, certainly, because I think Murray Stein has sold 1 million of his books since BTS started to make albums based on his book. And his book is called Jung's Map of the Soul. And so it's an introductory book. It's rather easy to follow. And so if you want a good book to just crack into Jungian thought, that's a good one to start with. It's not Dr. Jung's writing, but it's by one of the leading Jungian analysts of this century. And at the beginning of this, I was talking about the conference that will be held in April in Ascona, Switzerland, the Aranos Conference, and Dr. Stein will be present there. So if you can attend, I urge you to do so. And Nicholas says, I think the same way Jordan Peterson became phenomenon. BTS is also a phenomenon due to the Jungian currents. Think it's an emergent archetype in the culture. Yes, I think that's true. Jung himself represents a current alchemy. Yes, and more, much more than that, but certainly alchemy. Can I link you to BTS with English subs? No, I can't, but Google can take care of that for you. So I urge you to go back and find the music video for the introduction of their last album, which is called Map of the Soul Persona. That is a very, very good example. So Map of the Soul Persona music video, that should be a good one. And the Fire says, I'm a fan of Peterson. Well, that's good. Jordan Peterson is a brilliant man, and he's just a little bit too stuck on the logos side of the ledger. And Dr. Jung's work was on the other side of the ledger, the side of the ledger where we have life. And so, we need logos, we need rules, we need instructions for building things, we need music scores, etc. But none of those things have life in them. Life, a holy Bible is a black book that's a black doorstop unless you put life into it. And so, my computer might as well be an anchor unless I'm putting life into it as I am right now. And so that's what we have to start considering, is that the overemphasis on the logos over the last 2,000 years has caused us to actually lose the meaning of life. That's the so-called meaning crisis that's going on. And if you watch the 50 videos, I'll save you the trouble. If you watch the 50 videos of John Vervaeke, you will not understand the meaning of your life. No way. Because mostly what he has in there, 99.5% of what he has in there, is a dictionary definition of meaning, which doesn't have anything to do with the meaning of your life. For that, you have to go ask your own soul, what is the meaning of your life? And if you're a nihilist and you don't know what the meaning of your life is, it's time that you get a life and not sit around waiting for somebody else to give it to you. And the Fire says, introduction map of the soul persona video. Shall I Google that? Yes, that's the one. Yeah, Nicholas says he was speaking that beyond their specific content and product line, it's what they represent and bring to the culture. And the Fire says you can choose meaning of your life and have many meanings. Absolutely. I agree with that. And so, I certainly have many meanings in my life and in the lives of my 10 grandchildren. But that's true. But you have to not wait around for an old geezer like me to tell you how to find the meaning of your life. You have to go find it for yourself. And that you won't find in any books. That you have to find for yourself. Okay, so I've been reading from the Red Book by C.G. Jung, the Reader's Edition, pages 328 to 332, and I will continue with my reading of Liber Secundus probably tomorrow. with a passage called Nox Secunda. And so I would say I'm probably 3/4 of the way through the Red Book. As of now, I have 126 pages left to read, believe it or not. The part in the middle here is what I have left to read. And then I will have the whole Red Book read. So I urge you to take a look at that and get yourself a copy. If you're not a member of our Dropbox and you would like to be, write to me at skip.conover@gmail.com, and I will add you to our Dropbox so that you can find these books and at least look through them. I find I can't really read them on electronic version in great detail, but I can at least scan through them and get an idea what they are and whether I want to buy the book. So it's worth having. Okay, so Nicholas says, what is the black book with the Bollingen symbol? I think you're talking about this one. This is volume 11 of the collected works of C.G. Jung, which is Psychology, Religion, Psychology and Religion, East and West. And so I finally sprung for this book. It's not a cheap book, but I've been reading it in various other forms for years, and I decided I better have a copy. So that's what I have, and I will be reading some passages out of it sometime soon, probably before I read the Zarathustra lectures. So Dr. Jung took a book that's in the original Nietzsche's book, Thus Spake Zarathustra, is about 200 pages long, and Dr. Jung's essays or lectures about Zarathustra are 1,600 pages long. Go figure. Elliot says, late to the session, but can anyone give me a brief overview of what was talked about the K-pop group BTS? Well, BTS has adopted Jungian thought and has based its last two, at least its last two, and maybe more of its albums on Dr. Jung's work, and especially on Dr. Mary Stein's book, Jung's Map of the Soul, an Introduction. I wonder how much the entire Bollingen set costs. Yeah, I don't know, and I'm not sure you could even get it. I just got volume 18, and it came in 2 books this thick, and I said, oh, gee, they accidentally send me 2 copies. Good, I'm going to be able to give one to somebody. But oh no, they're volume 18 is in 2 books. The first one's about 500 pages, and the second one is about 500 pages. And those were the books that the Jungian analysts wanted to hide from the rest of us. So I'm going to be paying attention to that one much, much more over the coming year. And the reason is that the Jungian analysts hid the fact that Dr. Jung's work is largely about religion. They kept up this fiction that it was about psychology. And and I once asked one of the leading Jungian analysts in the country why they hid this fact from the public. And he said, well, we had to do it to protect the development of our profession and from attack by theologians, of course. And so anyway, now that Dr. Jung has passed and the Red Book is published, etc., I think it's time to come clean about what the book is really, or what his work was really about. It's really very heavily about the soul, and that has a large war in religion. Now, keep in mind that philosophy means literally love of Sophia, and Sophia is wisdom. And so it is the soul, love of the soul. So philosophers are people who love the soul. And, that's what Dr. Jung's work was also about, which is the inner self, the inner part of us. So Montana says, when did you get into Jung, and was it before your military service? Well, as I've reflected on that, I've realized that I've been numinously touched by Jung basically all of my life. There's a new book, and I probably should tell you all about that new book here. So let me find that. Okay, so I'll share this with you because this new book is out, and wait a minute. Trying to deal with too many pieces of software here. All right, here's the new book. And this is about the Eranos conferences, which I talked about at the beginning of this session. There are still some places available if people want to attend Eranos this year. It would probably cost you around $2,500. It's about my budget to attend. And it's in April, between April 22nd and April 26th. But this book, Eranos, An Alternative Intellectual History of the 20th Century, is extremely powerful. And the reason I mention it, Montana, is because, as you know, my name is Conover, and the person who made the publication of the collected works in English possible was Mary Conover Mellon, the wife of Paul Mellon. And so I was commenting to Thomas Arst, who is he's the editor of this book, Thomas Arst, and this series of books. It's now going to have 4 volumes, and the 5th volume is on the way. But Dr. Arst, I was telling him that of anybody I can think of, who was the first person of fame that I know when they died? And the answer to that is when C.G. Jung died in 1961. And I was 15 years old, or actually, I guess I was 14 and a half at that point. And I guess it must have been because there was family discussion about C.G. Jung and what he meant to the world. And of course, Mary Conover Mellon's involvement with him. And regrettably, I just discovered by this new book on Eranos that she died exactly 6 days after I was born. And on the 7th day after I was born, Paul Mellon made the commitment to continue the publication of the collected works to the Mullingen Foundation. So, somehow, and also there's an important set of ideas that came out of a place called Amersfoort in Holland. And that's another synchronicity because my Dutch family that came to the New World in 1625, they too came from Amersfoort. So there's a lot of things going on that people don't understand yet. And so I just think it's really fascinating. And so I encourage you to buy the book, Eranos, An Alternative Intellectual History of the 20th Century. And I encourage you, if you have enough interest, to try to get registered for the Eranos conference, which begins on April 22nd. And I wouldn't dawdle if you're interested in it because, registrations are going to be extremely few from just unknown outsiders. And it's mainly a conference that is going to attract Jungian analysts, of course. So that's why I say all that. Let's see. So anyway, but my conscious really study of Dr. Jung's work began in 1987 when I started to study the Myers-Briggs type indicator. And so that's the answer to that question. And then in 1990, I read Man and His Symbols. And then in 1993, I had a confrontation with the unconscious, very much like Dr. Jung had, but mine was, unchaperoned in the sense that Dr. Jung was already a psychiatrist by the time he had his, so he had a little advantage. I didn't have that advantage, so I had a 8-month confrontation with the unconscious, very much like Dr. Jung's, but with entirely different cast of characters, and it mainly involved characters that I was aware of from Japan, and it emerged as a novel, which I published in 2014. Finally, I had put it in my drawer for 21 years, but when the Red Book came out in 2009, I realized, wow, if Dr. Jung could have an experience like that, then it's okay if I had that experience too. So, so beware, it's an adult book, and you can find an electronic version of it in the Dropbox if you search. But beware, it's adult material, and do not read it unless you're willing to accept that. Okay. Let's see. So Nicholas says, so lucky your family discussed Jung. Yeah, I surmise that they did. I don't actually remember that, but the only reason I can imagine that I would, as a 14-year-old, remember his death, because it's the only death of a famous person I knew until JFK was shot 2 years later, is because there must have been discussion around Mary Conover Mellon, because she was an unknown member of our family. Well, my original ancestor, I can show you that maybe. That might be of interest. Let's see. Maybe I can't. Let's see if I can do it here. This is my not what I wanted. This is my first ancestor in the New World, who came with his wife and 3 children in in 1625. And so those 5 people were 5 of the first 150 settlers of Manhattan Island. And so all Conover is a made-up name. It was anglicized in 1820, so 200 years after Wolfert came to the New World. It was made to sound English instead of Dutch. But anyway, we have a family tree that shows that I'm the 13th of first sons from Wolfert, which makes him 1/8,120th of my DNA. But anyway, he's the ancestor we always point to in my family. And so every Conover you ever met or ever will meet was related to him. Just for the record. Anyway. Nicholas asks, can I share what my lowest point in my confrontation was? No need for details if too personal, just the overview. Well, I mean, the concerning part is that I would say about a third of this book is to put it euphemistically, erotica. And so, some people will call it pornographic, I suppose. And that's why I didn't publish it originally. And that was the most concerning aspect of it. But, I now consider that book to be the autobiography of my anima for the period from 1962 to 1993 as it relates to Japan, where I lived for 8 years. I lived there in high school, and then I went back 16 years later and built a company in Japan for 5 years. So it so happens that I do know a lot about Japan and how things happen in Japan. And so that is the autobiography of my anima as it relates to that period of time. So anyway, okay, I think I better get back to my wife. And so I'm going to end the meeting for now. And I'll see you all another time, probably tomorrow sometime. Take care now. Let's see. Ari says, great to find your channel. Seems that Jung kept his Gnostic self quiet and separate from his professional scientist self for most of his life. Well, actually, he didn't, because the part of the Red Book entitled Scrutinies, which I've already read into the channel, is, and by the way, in all the descriptions of the parts of the Red Book, you'll find the complete playlist. And so I've already read the 7 Sermons of the Dead, which is a Gnostic style text that Dr. Jung wrote in 1916. And at that time, it was in the middle of World War I. And, there were very few people who had any clue what the Gnostics were. And so as a result, he considered that an error of his youth to actually publish the 7 Sermons of the Dead, the Septem Sermones. more to us. But you can find them in the Red Book in the back called Scrutinies, and you can find them on this YouTube channel because I've already read them. And in all the descriptions of the Red Book, or the readings of the Red Book, including this one after it gets published on YouTube as for playback, you'll find the complete playlist, and you'll be able to find the 7 sermons, which are in the last part of the Red Book. So, okay, so night, everyone. Take care. Good night, Sean. Thanks for being here. And here we go.